Veronica Daly Zalea, and I'm the teacher librarian at Santa Cruz High School, who's had the pleasure of being part of this year and last year's Big Read. On behalf of Santa Cruz Reads, I want to welcome you to this evening's readings by our Santa Cruz Reads Writing Contest winners. Santa Cruz Reads is a partnership of the Santa Cruz Public Libraries, Friends of the Santa Cruz Public Libraries, and Santa Cruz Writes. We believe that great literature encourages conversations and stimulates thinking. Great literature also stimulates creativity in writing. This year's Santa Cruz Reads Writing Contest Committee felt Steinbeck and The Grapes of Wrath would serve as inspiration for poetry and song and essay op-ed forms of writing. We created categories in each of those genres for middle school students, high school students, and adults. Before we begin, I want to thank some of our sponsors. This event was underwritten by a Big Read grant from the National Endowment for the Arts in partnership with Arts Midwest. In addition, this event could not have taken place without the generous support of the Friends of the Santa Cruz Public Libraries. This organization supports the Santa Cruz City-County Library System through fundraising, volunteer services, and advocacy. If you'd like to learn more about the Friends, Kevin Wallace is here this evening. And if he'll raise his hand, thank you. He will be here at the end of the event to tell you more. I want to thank Bookshop Santa Cruz for providing prizes for our winning contest entries. And special thanks to Casey Coonerty of Bookshop Santa Cruz for being here with us this evening. Thank you, Casey. We appreciate Santa Cruz City Council for providing us space in their council chambers here this evening. It's a very nice place for a comfortable reading. You might be hearing some background noise that could be coming on during the reading, and unfortunately, we really have no control over that, and we hope it will go away. I just want to mention it so you don't wonder why we're not turning that thing off. Maybe it will stay off, let's only hope. In addition, there are a number of other community members who have made this month of Santa Cruz Reads events possible. Please look them up on our website and give them your patronage. Without them, we wouldn't be here. This year's Santa Cruz Reads Writing Committee were able to recruit an illustrious panel of judges, and we are so appreciative of their generosity and time. To make quick mention of these folks that have wonderful bios, for fiction, we had Elizabeth McKenzie, author of Stop That Girl, a collection of short stories, editor of the Chicago Quarterly Review, managing editor of the New Catamaran Literary Reader, and recipient of the 2012 Gail Rich Award. In essay op-ed, we had Stephen Kessler, prose writer, poet, translator, and editor. Most recent books include Scratch Pegasus, a new book of poems, and The Mental Traveler, a novel, editor of the Redwood Coast Review. For poetry, we had our very own Santa Cruz Poet Laureate, David Swanger, author of 4 books of poetry and The Poem as Process, UCSC Emeritus Professor of Education and Creative Writing, currently Santa Cruz County Poet Laureate. And to help him, our first reader in poetry was Lisa Ortiz, whose poems have been featured in the Comstock Review, the Literary Review, and the Crab Creek Review. She teaches creative writing at Gateway School. This year's writing contest's invitation to write asked all writers of poetry, fiction, and essay to consider the following. Freedom of expression is one of democracy's most powerful tools. In the spirit of John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath and the works of other socially conscious writers, we invite you to write about issues prominent in today's political, cultural, and social landscapes that parallel those from the past. The writers you will hear from tonight have all answered this invitation. It's my pleasure to introduce tonight's readers, this year's winners of Santa Cruz Reads The Grapes of Wrath writing contest. To begin, I'm going to name each of the runners-up that are seated before you now, and then they're going to each give you the pleasure of hearing them read their own original work. And then I'll be introducing the winners, and they will be reading theirs. Each of these runners-ups will receive a $25 gift certificate from our local bookstore. In middle school, we have Celeste Ortega from Cesar Chavez Middle School. Middle school fiction. In high school fiction, we have Drew Young from Cypress Charter School. For adult fiction, we have Kathleen Crow. For middle school poetry, we have Jessica Hilger of Mission Hill Middle School. We are missing our high school poetry winner, Bin Doan of Cypress Charter School, so far this evening. And for adult essay, we have Alice Keys. And so now to the important part of the event, and I think that Celeste, you had a little introduction to read before you share your piece with us tonight?
Yes. Some people already have a copy of the story, so if you want to read along, that's fine. And I just want to say my heart goes out to all those families who have lost the ones they loved in the recent shootings. A minute of silence for these people. Thank you all. I think wars would have less heartbreak and death if they used paintball guns instead of guns that kill. Many people would live. Maybe one day I'll write a story about that. And now I will read my essay. A Cat's Tale. My name is Tigger. I am a fully grown male cat. Many people misspell my name. Usually, they spell it with a double G instead of a double I. I am mainly a house cat due to an event that I will tell you about later on in the story. I belong to a wonderful family that feeds me and gives me attention, but sometimes they overdo it, you know? What else does a cat want to do but explore the outside world? That is exactly what I did. The family trusted me enough to go and come back in 3 days' time, so I figured why not go outside and travel a little bit. It was chilly. My house is close to a slough that has a lake populated by ducks, a walking trail, and weeping willows that created a romantic scene. It was night. You could see the lake shimmer, and the moon was reflected in the water. Various wild plants grew here and there. Vines of prickly wild blackberries curled around a small, brown and worn-out wooden fence. All of this scenery is right next to the garden in the backyard of my family's home. I just started walking around with no specific destination, and I wound up at someone's house. I crawled under their blue sedan and was warned by another cat to leave or fight. I was smart enough to know not to mess with another cat in their territory, so I fled. I was half blinded by headlights, and I just barely crossed the road alive. For the next 2 days, I ran into unfriendly creatures of all shapes and sizes. But I ran into friendly ones too. It got harder and harder to find good places to sleep. On the 5th day of the week, I decided it was about time to go back home. I went across bridges. I looked at street names. I even tried to read a map of Watsonville. It took me hours, but I finally reached a familiar street by dawn. Something moved in the greenery. I turned my head in alarm. I let out a warning growl. My nose twitched with anticipation. I positioned myself for a fight. My heart pounded in my chest, and I hoped that whatever that creature was, that it didn't hear my heartbeat, and that it was docile. Just my luck, it was the most hostile-looking raccoon you can imagine. It was even foaming at the mouth. The teeth were like tiny daggers jammed in the mouth of a cave. He bit my leg. I yelled in pain and fought back. He saw my attack, and he tore through my paw as if it were butter. I was tackled to the ground, and I let out a yelp of pain. He bruised my ribs. I lashed out one last time, and the blow connected to his face. The raccoon retreated with deep scratch marks and shattered pride. Then I caught a glimpse of the welcome sight of the shimmering lake that looked almost holy in the bright light of dawn. Strange little plants grew here and there, and somber-looking willow trees gave off a look of peace and serenity. I was home. The smell of dirt and pond scum filled my nose. I limped to the garden, and I crawled under the porch with a feeling of relief. I called out to my favorite owner, Celeste, and hoped that she would hear me. I kept on calling, and I heard an upstart in the house. Chairs were being hastily pushed back, and I heard the sound of heavy footsteps. The door swung open so hard that it made a cracking noise. She ran down the stairs 3 steps at a time. Celeste ran into the backyard, came back, looked up, and stood there as if wondering where I was. I called out again, and she finally saw me. She picked me up gingerly and gave me a hug. She rubbed my head on her cheek, and I mewed in pain. She told me how much she missed me, and that I should not do that to her again. She gasped when she saw my battle wounds. "Oh no, Tigger, what happened? Mom! Mom! Tigger's hurt!" she said as she climbed the stairs as fast as she could without hurting me. I had to take a trip to the veterinarian.
Thank you, Celeste. And now, in high school fiction, we will hear from Drew Young of Cypress Charter School.
This story is called A Promise in Red. To the far south, in the solemn deluge of Hanoi, the town goes about its duties. People pass each other without a second glance, and among the doldrums of crowds, there's a child. His selective stature sets him apart from the rest, and he is a smaller boy by comparison. His name was Joe, and he lived in a selective neighborhood on the upper side of town, where all the American immigrants seemed to congregate. But he wasn't that different overall. He did things just like all the other kids did. He walked down the street to school every morning, and he saw the red flowers planted by the park in full bloom. He was average by any other means. To the date, July 24th, he had lived in Hanoi now for a year now. So he was still adjusting to the culture and meeting friends, 2 of which he had already made were David, the prodigal son, who would have been acclaimed by all the others to be the top dogs in terms of academic achievements. The other was Noel, and there wasn't much to Noel. He had gotten in a bit of trouble with the school, but overall, he was a good student. The bell rang, and over its cry rose a tumultuous uproar. The children piled over each other in an attempt to be the first outside, though Joe, David, and Noel stayed behind. David was providing his typical after-school 30-minute tutor lesson, and as tradition, Joe followed and watched the sky in search of some solace, probably escape from the classroom, a warm home-cooked meal from Mom, an absolute array of other things to do than sit in the cold, unyielding metal chair. "Joe," called a familiar voice, the voice of David. "Huh? Oh, yeah. Sure," Joe replied, not fully understanding what he had heard behind the babbling of a mind of another plane. "Did you even listen to me?" David said in a harsh tone, as he looked over to Joe in a disapproving manner. "Yeah, I got all of it, every last word," Joe said, raising his hand and eyebrows in a disapproving mood. "All right then, if you can, tell me the last thing I said to you." David was hoping to catch Joe in a form of a lie. "You said, 'Did you even listen to me?'" Joe said with a self-righteous smile and a quick-witted accomplishment. Good enough," David said, knowing he wouldn't get much more than that. You're free to go." Joe smiled at him, thinking he had succeeded at outwitting David. David, on the other hand, was just bored of asking. Joe grabbed his stuff from under the table and was quick to throw his notebook and pencils into it. David looked on with a horrified expression. "Bye, David," Joe called. As he headed for the door, he gave a small wave. "Yeah, bye, Joe. You're coming over tonight, though, right?" Joe thought for a minute and then remembered his prior plans. "Yeah, I am. Over at 7, right?" It was a bit late to do anything, but it was the end of the week tradition. Joe opened the door and the smell hit him almost instantly. Stir-fried rice and eggplants. Although many would hold them without themselves from this array of fragrances, nobody made eggplant better than Joe's mother, or so he believed. So he was quick to grab a chair, tossing his bag haphazardly in the hallway. "Smells delicious," he said, watching her bring up the tray to the table. Joe's sister was not far behind, choosing a seat opposite him. "Joe, where's my flower?" He signed, realizing his fault. "Sorry, I didn't get my chance to pick up one today. Tomorrow, maybe," knowing he had done something horribly wrong. She looked at him with a pout and grabbed some food off a plate, giving herself a generous portion. Joe knew she would be mad until she got a red flower, and he looked on from it to his mother and then thanked her before cleaning his plate and giving his sister the usual farewells. The plan was simple: get the flower and walk back to David's to that night. Perfect. So he set on it out into the unyielding night and down the corner. He stumbled a bit in the late afternoon light and then eventually found the flower. He plucked it quick and headed to David's house silently.
Thank you, Drew. And now for our adult fiction category, we have Kathleen Crow.
Hello, testing. So I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for two things. I'm actually a high school teacher, and many of the students who are here tonight from Cyprus are my students. And so I was sort of dared by a student who said, "Hey, wait a minute, you're making us all do this. Why don't you do it too?" And also our principal, Les Forster, who kind of said, "Why not? Hey." So thank you to those encouraging folks. All right, so my story is called Coyote. And it is inspired by maybe about a month and a half ago when it was about 28 degrees outside, and I was driving by the railroad tracks and I saw some folks like cleaning out encampments, and it was clear that probably most of the homeless folks that lived around there were probably at a shelter because it was so cold. And so I got the feeling that many people were kind of taking advantage of that to, clean in and around their homes, and it saddened me. Coyote. It was going to be cold that night, but she was lucky enough to know about an abandoned house in Bonnie Doon. The place must have recently been foreclosed upon or resold. Her friend Old Sam kept an eye open for a good warm-up place. The rule was never to overuse such a place, never sleep there more than 2 consecutive nights in a row, and always, always leave at least 4 days in which the place was left undisturbed. Old Sam said to make it on the streets you have to be smarter than everyone else. He often was. Sam had secured a place in a shelter that night, but the shelter was full up. It was supposed to be the coldest night of the winter, so far 28 degrees. "Josephine, you can't walk that off," Sam said to her with a bitter cackle. He took pity on her, and he gave her the directions. Last he knew, the gas and hot water were still on, and the key was under the mat of the back door. It was a challenge getting out there. She would hitchhike to Davenport and walk the rest. It'd be safer to ride her bike, but she couldn't go that far due to a weak ankle she had obtained from an injury. Wouldn't guess it by her appearance now, but many years ago she was a professional dancer. The pushers and the freaks always assumed a pole of some sort was involved. She rarely had the energy to say it was ballet. Most lacked the cultural understanding of what that meant. She stashed her bike and her sleeping bag in the bushes by the railroad tracks and hitched a ride north. The drive from Santa Cruz to Davenport is only 10 minutes, but it's 10 minutes of sheer beauty. Long stretches of highway with golden rolling hills on one side and great expanses of deep blue ocean on the other. She was mesmerized by its breathless splendor, and when the nice couple who had picked her up asked if she'd settle a dispute between them, she felt as though she had been woken from a dream. The wife, a redhead, doused in lavender, said, "My husband says coyotes are stupid animals, but I think they're cunning and sly, sort of like a fox. I've seen a lot of roadkill at the side of this highway, but never a coyote. They're smarter, aren't they?" Josephine quickly agreed. The husband laughed it off as they pulled into the roadhouse, and Josephine thanked them for the ride. He was ruffled about the debate in stark contrast to the Lavender Queen who waltzed away in victory. The husband shook his head and followed his peacock. This day went well indeed. She was able to wash some clothes in the sink, bathe, and repose on a carpeted floor next to a heater. Luxury. She hadn't eaten since noon, so hunger pains were the only negative element. The following morning, a police car drove by just as she was clearing the joint. He may have seen her. Damn, she thought. It'll be a while before anyone can sleep there now. The wait in Davenport was cold and seemed never ending. Finally, a weird guy in a pickup pulled up. If it wasn't for his scruffy little dog on the seat, she might have passed him up on the ride. He was a speeder, so she almost missed it, but the blood in the road made the sight unmistakable. On the side of the road lay a carcass of a mangled coyote. She felt a deep sense of sadness. Upon her return to Santa Cruz proper, she discovered that there had been a neighborhood cleanup in and around the Seabright area in an effort to encourage the homeless to move elsewhere. Homeowners were working together in a common cause of preserving property value. She saw men filling garbage bags with sleeping bags and jackets, intermingled with trash. Also, there was a pile of rusty bikes, most likely on its way to the dump. One of those bikes was hers. But she knew better than to confront real citizens. She had $2, so she walked to the nearest cafe and ordered a coffee. She took her first sip, and she heard a man say to a woman, "They say it's the coldest winter here in 20 years.
Thank you, Kathleen. And now for our middle school poetry runner-up, Jessica Hilger from Mission Hill Middle School.
My paper is called Judgment at Sunset. I am colorful and mysterious. I leave you and stay with you. I streak the sky with a blend of vivid colors. I drip red like blood into the pink of my heart and slowly sink into the yellow below. No one judges me by which colors I project. When I choose which colors to stripe the sky, people smile admiring them, and I smile back. All of my colors are thought beautiful by everyone. I am in between the sun at day and the moon at night, just like black and white. While I gaze down on you, you feel peace and joy. When you see me, you fill with happiness. You don't care what colors I am, so why should you care about the colors of people? When you fill with this love and kindness, it can have the power to destroy all this judgment and blindness. Now the moment has come for me to close my eyes and you open yours. Let's end the day and begin the night.
Thank you, Jessica. And now to hear our adult essay, Alice Keys.
Thank you. I'm really grateful to have had the chance to reread John Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath this year. I haven't read it for a really long time. I had no idea what it was about anymore. So this was just a great opportunity. So I got to write an op-ed. The takeover of all aspects of American life by corporations was in its infancy when John Steinbeck documented the systematic displacement and murder of agrarian populations during the banking land grab that led to modern, industrialized, and corporate-owned agriculture. Good people work for corporations. They did then. Folks still have kids to feed. But people are slaves that work inside the monster's belly. Slaves don't control the master. Steinbeck wrote, "The monster isn't men, but it can make men do what it wants." There's little in America that's free from corporate control. Everyone you know and everything you buy, eat, or use carries the mark of the beast. Some suppose that doctors or brainy computer types control the monster. As a physician, I've been accused of being in control of the medical and pharmaceutical parts of the monster. But I'm not. Neither I nor my husband will earn more money from professional employment in our lifetimes. I'm a physician. He's a software engineer. You're welcome to speculate that we're too old or too lazy or too behind the times to find work. My software engineer husband has applied for over 200 jobs in the past 2 years for which he's qualified. He's gotten half a dozen interviews. That's 6. Once they see his age, they're done. I've only found 2 part-time jobs in the last year and a half. Both expected 24/7 work for a few hours of pay each week. Earning benefits was not a possibility. The work of today's American medical professional, that's your doctors, is buried deep inside the craw of the monster. A doctor's job is high-speed pill pushing, test ordering, and typing. To do this job, one must collude with the pretense that selling pills, procedures, and tests is the same as medical care. Nothing more is allowed. Because of our age, middle 50s, we're both older than any corporation wants to bother with. Even though we have education, experience, and well-honed skilled, our age puts us into higher risk actuarial brackets when it comes to using expensive benefits like health insurance, retirement accounts, sick leave, vacation days, life insurance, and disability. It's easy for corporations to sound generous when offering benefits to young workers who are unlikely to use them. It's another thing entirely to risk paying them out. We can't expect our children to support us. They are unlikely to be able to support themselves. No young American has a chance at a living wage job unless they achieve the high level of educational certification that comes complete with astronomical debt. This path is an expensive gamble. Young people keep going back to school and borrowing more money to do this. They hope that the next degree will make them employable at an income level where they can service their non-dischargeable education debts. The words industry and industrial complex shiver my marrow and make my stomach twist. These words are used to describe tangled webs of corporate ventures with masses of suffering humanity as their financial basis. Contrary to the old definition of the word industry, which once implied the making of things, there is not much being made inside our country by industry today. The Industrial Revolution in our country has moved past making real things here at home. The making of products has moved to third world countries where corporations impoverish people, poison their environment, and gobble their resources. This is not new. Corporations have a long history of enslaving people and devouring resources while accumulating big piles of cash for a few individuals. By definition, capitalism is supposed to generate big piles of cash or capital for a few people. When corporations outsource manufacturing to cheaper international labor markets, the beast is merely moving on to fresh meat. The financial services industry relies on indenturing people with debt to earn their profits. The petrochemical industry makes money by poisoning the planet. The medical and pharmaceutical industry drugs people. The prison industry locks people in concrete holding cells. The entertainment industry seduces us into worshiping the three-headed dog of materialistic greed, juvenile sex, and mindless violence. The military-industrial complex rains down death on starving families around the world. The last arena of employment opportunity in our country, the service industry, pays so little that workers can't afford rent or food. Growth in any of these industries depends on a steady increase in human suffering, more debt, more toxins, more pills, more prisoners, more brainwashing, and more killing. This is our modern Steinbeckian America. The monster grows. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice. Thank you to all of our first set of readers this evening. I want to come around and give them all their certificate and gift certificate and thank them. And then we will have our next round of readers come and take the seats.
Oh, yes, the certificate picture.
And now I'm excited to introduce the winners of this year's Santa Cruz Reads Writing Contest. And each of these winners will receive a $50 gift certificate to our local bookstore. To introduce them, beginning with middle school fiction, we have Jessica Guzman Rodriguez of Cesar Chavez Middle School. For high school fiction, we have Robin Macy of Cypress Charter School. In middle school poetry, we have Avia Brighter of Pacific Elementary School. For high school poetry, we have Elise Hopping of Cypress Charter School. Our high school writing contest committee winner is Emily McComber of Cypress Charter School. Our adult fiction winner is Vinnie Hansen. And for adult essay, we'll be hearing from Rebecca Garcia. And so now hearing from our middle school fiction winner, Jessica, will you please read?
I handed out some of the copies of my essay, and if you would like to read along with me, it's fine. The family was having money problems. The parents didn't have enough to feed themselves and their 2 kids. They knew that in the north they could make more money and send it to the kids so they could have food, clothes, and a roof over their heads. Everything will be fine, they thought, except that it wasn't. When they told the kids the good news, they only needed to see the girl's tears and the boy's face, ashen with grief, to know that they couldn't leave them while they went away to a land they didn't even know, leaving their kids with an aunt they didn't even know nor trusted. So they took them away with them, leaving the only place they knew as home behind. They should have known that crossing the border would not have been easy. In fact, they already knew it, but they decided to willingly unknow it. They had to, in order to not feel guilty about bringing the boy and the girl along with them. Once they had crossed the border, with some bruises and scratches as a souvenir, they all tried to forget about the harsh days and nights that they had at the desert. Eventually, they did. However, it was not for reasons they liked at all. They had to find a place to live and then find work to pay for the coyote that passed them over the border. Also, for the place in which they were going to live and for any things that they may need to live with, like clothes, shoes, and food. And they also had to enroll the kids at school. The boy's name was Jose. He was 15 years old. He was very protective of his family, but more so of his sister. The girl's name was Sonia. She was 2 years younger than her brother, 13. He had eyes as black as the night itself, while she had soft round ones that talked about how easily her delicate feelings could be broken. He obeyed commands that, to him, were reasonable. Still, he was like a lion, the proudest animal, which is strong and runs from nothing. They had in that the school was going to be difficult. One of the problems about school was that they didn't understand a word that the teachers or most of the students said. They thought themselves lucky that there were some classmates that were nice enough and took some of their time to translate what the teachers were saying. Then they were subscribed on a program where they were learning English. Needless to say, they were doing very good. But not everything that shines is gold. There were some kids that didn't like them. They always told them stuff in English when they passed by them. Even though they didn't understand the words, they knew that it was nothing flattering. The kids had their own problems, and so did the parents, Maria and Pedro. They didn't know if the money that they were earning was enough for next month's rent, or if it was, would there be enough left for food and the new clothes that they needed. They worked harder each day in the fields, even if by the time they got home, their backs were screaming with pain for the hard work that they did. Sometimes they just wished to give up on work, and every time that happened, they thought of their children. So they continued working and working and working. 2 years later, Sonia and Jose spoke English fluently. They were both very happy about that, and their parents were very proud of them. However, everything was not as good as they hoped it would be. Their mother was sick. She felt very weak and was losing her vision. Soon after their accomplishment, she died. They had to send her body back to Mexico. Their father went with her. 1 year later, he died too. People said that it was from grief. He was alone there because Jose and Sonia had to stay in the USA to study and work. And then they too were alone and had no one but each other. 5 years later, Sonia and Jose went back to their house in Mexico each time they could and visited their parents' graves. They had reached the American dream, and they knew that their parents were watching them, and they were happy, very happy for the four of them.
Thank you, Jessica. And now for high school fiction, Robin Macy of Cypress Charter School.
The romanticism of it all was beginning to fade. Jacob was now realizing the quiet desperation that money, or lack thereof, could bring out in a person. He had imagined himself very clever in his independence, a Siddhartha for suburbia, but he now saw himself as the others saw him. He was a homeless 19-year-old, homeless by choice, but still homeless. He had refused society, and now it refused him. No one looked at him besides the small clots of teenagers who mistook him for someone who could buy alcohol. Jacob understood in theory that the path to enlightenment was one of broken stones and cold nights, but when he had decided this, it was June, and riding the rails had seemed plausible and even attractive. But in December, it rains in California, and no one wants a reeking teenager, aesthete or not, on the dorm floor. Jacob really liked the idea of letting go of material possessions. It was a beautiful concept, but he had no toilet paper. His shoes were broken. There was nothing to eat and nowhere to sleep, and the eyes around him were not friendly. The college kids admired him. They blinked slowly like deer and mumbled, "Whoa," from their smoky throats. But at dusk they shambled back to the bus stop and flashed their expensive passes and were spirited back to their fortress-like UC in the gentle arms of some diesel-belching Goliath. Jacob turned and walked to nowhere under the small purple sky. The problem was in large part due to the fact that he did not like homeless people, who seemed all the same age and were emphatically not flower children. They were so tan that they resembled the mahogany leather purses Jacob's mother toted. They had not eschewed material possessions, but just didn't have any. Jacob hid from them in the forest, but it didn't always work. He woke one morning dewy and shoeless and decided to call his father, but his faith in the Eightfold Path was reaffirmed when he remembered that payphones had gone extinct in 2005, and anyways, he didn't have the change to use one. It was surely a sign, a warning not to give in to his material desperation. He burned his collected works of Hermann Hesse in a blaze of dogmatic certainty. He closed his eyes and tried to imagine shaking off the mortal coil, rising with the smoke past his own weak shoulders, discovered only a heartbreaking affection for his body. It seemed like a little child, an unprotectable mass of tubes and fluids, totally unaware of the effort he expended for it. He loved his body like he loved the kittens he found once near a highway, and wished he knew someone who could give it a good, loving home. Jacob imagined himself climbing back down into his body, embracing ever-gurgling deficiency until Jacob and Jacob's body meant the same thing. The fire was now gone, and he was terribly cold. The next day, as Jacob stood at the bank of a swollen creek, wondering whether washing his underwear was a concession to dukkha, the man Dale stumbled out of a patch of shrubs and into the water. He stood for half a second and then bellowed in shock, leaping back into the brush behind him. Jacob blinked a few times, wondering if this was a product of his starving mind. Dale was an enormous bear of a man with fists the size of paperback mystery novels and an improbably hairy face. He wheezed and gasped and stared wildly at Jacob. "It's cold," he explained, and Jacob realized it was the first time he had heard a human voice in several days. "I'm Dale." Jacob. His voice sounded cobwebby. And then Dale was across the street and puttering about him, putting food in his hands, commenting on the dangers of the wilderness, such as "this she-cougar I once fought," inspecting his leathery feet. Jacob tried to explain about the noble path, that he was stripping himself of desire, but Dale slapped him on the back and laughed. "Yeah, I've heard about that kind of thing, especially in this area, yeah. But here, kid, what's life for if it's not for living? Well, why suffer when there's all this?" He gestured expansively. "This. You see?" Jacob stared slack-jawed for a moment, and then the fig tree in his mind seemed suddenly blooming with potential. "Yeah," said Jacob, gazing out at his future. "Yeah, I see."
Thank you, Robin. And now we will hear from Avia Brighter from, where have we got you here? Our middle school at Pacific Elementary School. No. Middle school poetry. Which school are you at, Avia?
Pacific Elementary.
Okay, thank you.
My poem's called Without a Home. Stumble across the pavement, face down, tears drop and hit the gravel like rain. Car lights pass behind, feet reach the edge of the road. The gate slams, darkness envelops. Crumpled flowers fall from stiff fingers, float to the ground, scatter in the wind. Without a home, hope is a burden that is heavy but frail. Alone. Nevertheless, sleep falls. Bad memories float in the endless white substance of rest. Sometimes they appear almost as vividly as if real. Blood pounds through veins to sustain life. Heart beats to a rhythm unknown. Huddled at the trunk of the tree, raise your head and let the dark clouds above reflect in your upturned eyes. Despair. The light stream across your upturned face. New hope.
Thank you, Avia. And now for high school poetry, Elise Hopping of Cypress Charter School.
Right. Okay. My poem's called, well, actually song. It's called Captivated and Baited. You captivate me, you bait me. This heart is for your taking. All I need to know is you're warm and you're here, whispering lies into my ear. You take my body into yours, and my mind fills with horror as you take me how you baited me. Now I wake up every night screaming from a fright that fills my every bone. You've left me so alone. How can I stand to live remembering what you did? Now all my life is gone, my pride and dignity. I cannot stand myself for what you did to me. In my head is where I hid as you turned me into trash. You stole away my light, you burned me into ash. You wanted what I didn't, you stole it with such force. You watched me as I cried, which only made it worse. Tainted by your thirst, covered in red shame, a humiliating story forever in my name. This is my dark confession, no atonements to be paid. Now someone's finally listened and seen the mess you've made.
Thank you for your song lyrics, Elise. And now for our high school writing contest committee winner, Emily McComber of Cypress Charter School.
Hi, my poem's called The Rare Root. Live life to the fullest, they say, but we were taught fear, so we, the future, must take the safest route. Those who survive the rare route are respected, but their life choices not recommended. Shootings, gangs, drugs, and all the media, all the corrupt, all the wrong that's been committed, always interrupts our rare route, forcing us to make the safest choices and live life without risk. And maybe that's good for them, But for us, the ones who dream, we might just take the rare route, the one respected but not recommended and surely not regretted. Can you dare to dream, and will you travel the rare route?
Thank you, Emily. And now we'll hear from our adult fiction winner, Vinnie Hansen.
Hello. This is fiction, but it's based on a slice of my parents' life. They came of age during the Depression in rural South Dakota and married in 1939 when presumably the Depression was over, only to enter a life of poverty from which they never really escaped. The story is about 82% factual and about 100% true. Waste not, want not. Aberdeen watched her daughter Carmen drink Mogan David wine from a green slipper and then toss the pump with wild abandon into the wedding party. Aberdeen wondered when she had lost the capacity for such frivolity. It must have been about 1943, the time of the third baby. Such a miserable child. She had been barely pregnant with her when the government had added the railroad spur, and Mitchell got good paying work at 85 cents an hour. They canceled the lease on the one-room house in Phillip and moved with their two babies. When they had been in their hometown with the babies, Wayne and Carmen, Aberdeen had felt content. They knew everyone, and everyone knew the value of a pair of stockings. The school collected hose to be made into parachutes and powder bags. Coffee, meat, butter, cheese, shoes, and gasoline were all rationed. The ads in Phillip's Pioneer Review offered $12 a ton for bones to aid the war effort, dry, clean, greasy, from any animal. Aberdeen's mind chased after the exact moment for her sadness and thought it might have been when Mitchell was transferred to build the ordnance depot in Provo, down in the southwest corner of South Dakota. He bought a teardrop trailer with a little bed over the big bed. But she frowned as Dawn pulled Carmen onto her tiptoes for a passionate kiss. At first, she had been delighted with that tiny trailer. It even had an ironing board under the bed. Not that she ironed anything, since they didn't have electricity. The back of the trailer opened, and they had a stove there. And in the summer heat, they largely lived outdoors with the families in the camp. No, the loss of playfulness must have come later. Aberdeen eyed Eva, her third child, skulking at the perimeter of the party, glowering because her grandma had snatched away her wine. Then Aberdeen glanced at Mitchell across the room. He laughed and bounced Hans, their youngest, too big to be riding Mitchell's hip, his Buster Browns dangling to Mitchell's knees. It was hard to believe Carmen had been a baby in her lap back then. In August, when Aberdeen rode the train home to see her folks, it had been loaded with soldiers, and they allowed her to travel in the caboose with the officers. One had touched Wayne's golden head and said, "What a handsome little soldier." Carmen had squirmed to get down, stolid and independent even then. Though 6 months along, Aberdeen hoped her baggy pants would hide her pregnancy, but her ma had known before the train pulled from the station. "You write to Mitchell and you tell him to send you some money." Her ma had met them with clothes from Montgomery Ward, including one frilly, impractical dress for Carmen. But they stayed so long, her ma eventually said, "You tell Mitchell to get a house." Mitchell found a boxcar a few miles away from the encampment near the town of Edgemont. Along with several families, they squatted on the fringe of the city park. Hot water bubbled from a natural spring, so water from the city well was free. Public menace, the townspeople cried. We have to keep our parks clean and safe. To rouse them, the city closed the public toilets. Mitchell located a new spot by the railroad tracks and power plant. He bought a couple of goats and they stashed them across the river in the woods. As usual, Aberdeen ended up tending the animals, 9 months pregnant, pulling 2 kids in a wagon to the grain elevator, and then the children could walk back, Carmen just a toddler, while she carted a bale of alfalfa. She maneuvered the wagon across a rope rail footbridge that swung precariously with each tug. Eva was born on Halloween, and the weather turned cold. The goats' water froze, and someone threatened to turn them in to the Humane Society. They butchered the goats. We could get us some rabbits, Mitchell offered. It was then, Aberdeen figured, with the 3rd child wailing in her arms. Eva was not a joyful child like Wayne or a stubborn little fighter like Carmen. She was a miserable child, crying at the lack of comfort, her protests echoing off the metal of the boxcar. That was the moment. That was when her motto of waste not, want not, transformed, when it hollowed out like an empty nest and became just the absence of wanting.
Thank you, Vinny. And now we'll be able to hear from Rebecca Garcia for adult essay.
The title of my essay is The Grapes of Wrath and Undocumented Students, and I want to acknowledge 3 of the undocumented students from Cabrillo College who motivated me and helped me understand their plight. And I want to acknowledge them by asking them to each please stand up. Martha, Yoni, and Maria. I was 10 years old when I first read The Grapes of Wrath. I am now 65 years old, but I clearly remember how upon reading the novel, I immediately connected to the story. I understood the oppressive experiences of the Okies because at the time I was the daughter of Mexican farm laborers working in the strawberry fields of Watsonville, and we were very, very poor. The oppressive conditions as described by Steinbeck have much improved, but oppression of certain groups still exists. One of those groups is undocumented immigrant youth. For a year now, I have had the privilege of assisting undocumented students from Cabrillo College in their scholarships applications. I have heard the stories of oppressive conditions in education, healthcare, and labor. Grandpa was quoted, quote, "This is my country. I belong here. I ain't a-going." Undocumented students were brought to this country as children. This is the only country they know. This is their home. They're not going anywhere. Consequently, immigration reform is needed to support them. All parents want their children to have a good education. However, in schools today, many educators lack the skills to teach second language learners. This has been an obstacle for success for many of the undocumented students. In Santa Cruz County, most undocumented students are Spanish-speaking. Undocumented students have felt the humiliation of not being able to speak the English language correctly, not being able to read English correctly, or not being able to write English correctly. Consequently, as young adults, they now lack the confidence and skills of being able to write a personal essay for their scholarship application. Some of these students have been in the United States for 6 years or longer, and they have not yet learned the English language. The lack of English development affects them academically. They may have graduated from high school or received their GED, but they are not prepared for higher education. The educational system has failed them. Most undocumented youth come from families that cannot afford medical insurance and health care. Consequently, when ill, they often revert to herbal remedies, such as yerba buena, spearmint for fever, manzanilla, chamomile for vomiting, clavo, cloves for toothaches, and many others. Often these remedies do not suffice, and they are unable to get medical care because of the lack of insurance. For the citizens who lack insurance, Obamacare will now take care of them. However, undocumented youth will not be eligible for Obamacare. They will not be eligible for the diagnosis of treatment of illness or disease. The lack of health care and insurance is an added stress for them as they attempt to attain a degree. On June 15, 2012, President Obama initiated the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. This initiative will protect undocumented immigrants 30 years and younger from being deported for 2 years. It will also give them a work permit. However, for those who do not apply or are denied, the oppressive work conditions will continue. There are Cabrillo students who on the days they don't attend class work very long hours in the fields. There are others who have been given work in restaurants and will work up to 10 hours without overtime pay. And then there are those who clean houses or do gardening work for very little pay. This is because the employer knows they are undocumented and they will not complain of their working conditions. It is against the law to give employment to undocumented residents, but sometimes employers turn a blind eye to these workers. Undocumented youth are held hostage in the labor system. Immigration reform is needed to relieve undocumented students from the oppressive conditions as described above. One of those reforms is the DREAM Act. The DREAM Act would permit certain immigrant students who have grown up in the U.S. to apply for a temporary legal status and to eventually obtain permanent legal status and become eligible for U.S. citizenship if they go to college or serve in the U.S. military. Students with these conditional permanent resident status would be able to work, drive, go to school, and otherwise participate normally in day-to-day activities on the same terms as other Americans. The DREAM Act would legitimize their, quote, Americanship. John Steinbeck expressed his social and political views in The Grapes of Wrath. We as citizens of this great country have the responsibility of continuing his fight. We must eliminate the oppressive conditions of our undocumented youth. We must have immigration reform and support the DREAM Act.
Thank you, Rebecca. And I hope that you'll all join me again in congratulating our winners of this year's contest. I want to present them each with their certificates and gift certificates, and then I will return for a few brief closing remarks. He's here now. If you wanted to know. Sure. Let me finish this one. Yeah. Thank you. It's good to hear you both years. Thank you for being so kind. It's really nice. Thank you very much and congratulations. Should we just have him sit here? Yeah. You should just scoot around the corner there with your So we had a late arrival of one of our winners, and we're going to be able to hear from Bin Doan after all. He's here, and so we're going to invite him up.
Oh, snap.
We're so glad you were able to join us this evening. And this is our high school poetry winner, Ben Doan of Cypress Charter School.
All right, I can go.
Yes, please. Yes,
All right.
please.
All right, so this poem's called The Thrill, and it starts with, it's the drugs, the marijuana, the needles inside you that makes you go insane. In a baby's eyes, it's filled with hate and lies because of the TV screen, the Playboy magazines. It's all the reasons why your mother screams. 'Cause you grow up so fast, the short time won't last. It could end today or tomorrow. The hate builds up so fast. Now you're a teenager playing Call of Duty, watching their every move. The sneakiness, the killing, it builds up a thrill. Standing there alone in the mirror thinking, do you want to be a murderer or a professor? On and on these thoughts go. Tomorrow at school in the afternoon, he plants a bomb, standing there from afar, watching and hearing the screaming and the blood. The things in society that gave you that thrill, is this what you've become? It's the drugs, the marijuana, the needles inside you that makes you go insane. In a baby's eyes, it's filled with hate and lies because of this TV screen, the Playboy magazines. It's all the reasons why your mother screams, because you grow up so fast, a short time. Let's see. Oops. Oh, snap. All right. Oh, snap. I totally just lost my place. Playboy magazines. It's all the reasons why your mother screams, because you grow up too fast. You stand there, you give a laugh because you know your life's been through hell and back. But what about the economy, the whites and the blacks? It's all the reasons why you choose to sit in the front or the back. The peace and the hate, the wars, it's everything that life has in store.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you to all of tonight's readers. If you're like me, you'll be glad to hear that all of these pieces are going to be posted on the website at santacruzreads.org, because I thought they were incredible, and I'm sure we all want to go back and be able to re-experience and reread them. It was lovely to hear the words read aloud by the original writers. And if you'd like to hear some more literary Santa Cruz writers read their work, Catamaran Literary Reader is launching their second issue at the Tannery this evening at 7, so you'd be able to head right on over there. Again, I want to thank all of you for coming. I want to thank everyone who entered the contest. I want to thank all of the people who worked very hard on the contest, and especially I want to thank our writers who read for us this evening. Thank you again.